Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. We take these sprawling narratives, these mountains of facts around the world's most influential people, and we try to distill them.
Right, down into the sharpest, most illuminating insights for you.
And today, we are taking an exhaustive look at John Lennon.
A big one.
It is. Our source material is dense, a huge stack of biographies, interviews, historical records. It covers everything. His tumultuous personal life, the huge shifts in his music.
And of course, his incredibly high-stakes political activism. And maybe most importantly, the lasting complexity of all those fractured relationships.
When you approach a figure like Lennon, you have to recognize that the mythology can just completely overshadow the man.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was foundational, co-creator of the most successful songwriting partnership in history.
A two-time inductee into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right. But, those accolades, they don't explain the why. The real insights, the ones that make this a true deep dive, they lie in understanding that constant, almost self-inflicted conflict.
Internal and external.
Relentlessly. That's what fueled his creativity. He really weaponized his own vulnerability.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our goal is to move beyond the icon and trace that emotional lineage. We want to understand the man who, late in his career, admitted he just wanted to be accepted by society.
But realized he couldn't. He was, in his own words, intrinsically incapable of being anything other than a loudmouth lunatic poet-musician.
So we're tracing that path, from his really difficult, unstable childhood, straight through to the defiant political figure who challenged the very systems that tried to silence him, to really begin to understand that deep-seated anger, the searing sarcasm, and that immense lifelong search for unconditional love. We have to start at the very beginning.
We do.
John Winston Lennon, born in Liverpool in 1940, his name itself is a statement, isn't it? A nod to his grandfather and, kind of ironically, to Winston Churchill.
Yeah, and right away you see that pattern of instability and absence begin to form.
This absence is it's the foundational trauma.
It is. His father, Alfred Lennon, was a merchant seaman, so he was physically gone for long stretches. But what's worse, he just stopped sending paychecks in early 1944.
So the money just stopped.
It just stopped. And that quickly led to his mother, Julia Stanley, realizing she just couldn't cope. She couldn't handle the responsibility.
And she eventually transferred custody of young John to her elder sister, Mimi Smith.
Exactly, who lived at Mendip's, 251 Menlove Avenue. And Mimi, she provided the structure. She provided the home. But the emotional reality for John was one of, well, abandonment by both parents.
That dual abandonment is the key scar, isn't it? Even though he was, as he said later, surrounded by 5 incredible women, his mother, his aunt, and his maternal aunts.
Precisely. Lennon later reflected on these 5 strong, intelligent, beautiful women, and he said they provided him with his first feminist education.
But while he respected their strength.
Right, the early trauma of not having that stable nuclear family, the kind he saw all his friends enjoying, it led to this profound sense of envy. And that later fueled his rebellious streak. He felt he had been failed by the people he should have been able to rely on.
The sources detail this unbelievably sharp, almost traumatic moment in 1946. John was only 5.
It's shocking. It's like something out of a film.
A portrait of parental conflict?
Totally.
Yeah.
His father, Alfred, just shows up after this long absence, takes John to Blackpool, and is secretly plotting to emigrate with him to New Zealand.
And Julia finds out.
She finds out, follows them with her partner, Bobby Dykins, and she forces this moment of choice. The account that's often repeated in the Lennon lore. It involves the 5-year-old being made to choose
which parent he would leave with.
One version claims he chose his father twice, but then ran crying after his mother as she started to walk away.
And while historians debate the exact, the mechanism of that choice.
The takeaway is that this little boy was put in an impossible position. And his father, after that, just disappeared from his life for the next 20 years.
That sense of being pulled, of instability, feeling rejected, it seems to have manifested really early in his academic career. He wasn't stupid. Far from it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But he struggled massively in the formal school system.
Failed his O-levels, eventually expelled from Liverpool College of Art.
Right, a notoriously difficult academic performance. But the deeper nugget the sources reveal is that he faced really significant challenges because of undiagnosed dyslexia, which severely affected his reading and writing skills. And, when someone who is highly intelligent struggles in that kind of formal, language-dependent environment, they often lash out or channel that energy somewhere else.
And for Lennon, that channeling was through humor, through sarcasm, through wordplay.
Yes. Exactly. If he couldn't beat the system, he'd mock it. He quickly cultivated this reputation as the class clown. But his clowning is actually highly creative.
The cartoon.
The comical, anti-authoritarian cartoons for his self-made school magazine, which he brilliantly titled The Daily Howl.
That's amazing.
It wasn't just doodles. This was an early outlet for the literary genius that would later emerge in his published writing. That early need to translate complex emotions into clever, often crude wordplay was born right from that academic frustration.
It sounds like his home life with Mimi, while it was stable, did very little to encourage this nascent genius.
Mimi provided safety, but she was famously utilitarian and completely skeptical of his musical aspirations.
A classic conflict. The pragmatic guardian versus the dreamer.
Totally. It was actually Julia, his mother, who bought him his first inexpensive guitar, a Galatone Champion. But she had to deliver it to her own home because she knew Mimi was just fundamentally not supportive.
And we all know the famous line that Mimi gave him.
It's the ultimate parent quote, isn't it? She looked at this boy, who was already struggling in school and acting out, and she famously told him, "The guitar's all very well, John, but you'll never make a living out of it."
Wow. That skepticism, that lack of belief from the person providing his home, it probably just intensified his drive, right? To prove her wrong.
You have to think so.
All of this early instability and defiance, it culminates in the single most defining trauma of his youth. The sudden death of his mother, Julia, in 1958.
She was only 44, struck and killed by an off-duty police officer driving a car. She was just walking home after visiting Mimi's house.
And for the teenage Lennon, this was just utterly devastating.
This wasn't a slow illness. It was sudden, violent, completely senseless. The loss of the only parent he had any regular contact with.
And immediate aftermath was, what, 2 years of just raw, destructive behavior?
The sources describe a period consumed by blind rage. He turned to heavy drinking. He was prone to frequent, often violent fights. It was classic displacement of grief.
The trauma was so immense.
He spent years just trying to survive the emotion. But when you look at his catalog later, you realize that profound, unaddressed pain became the most intense creative fuel of his entire life.
It created a pattern, didn't it? That if he wanted to create truly powerful art, he had to confront his own deepest wounds.
Absolutely. The memory of Julia became this sacred source of inspiration. It directly inspired that famous 1968 Beatles track, Julia.
Which is just a tender, almost unbearably vulnerable piece.
And you see the cycle established right there. Profound personal pain, confrontation of that pain, and then its conversion into innovative, timeless art. His entire career is built on that process.
So out of that blind rage and that creative urgency, the seeds of, well, the world's greatest band were sown.
Right.
Lennon forms his skiffle group, the Quarrymen, in 1956. Named after his high school, he was looking for an outlet for all that raw energy.
And he found the perfect counterpoint, Paul McCartney, whom he met in July 1957 at the St. Peter's Church Garden Fete.
And that meeting changed everything.
It did. Lennon, the cynical academic failure leader, meets McCartney, the technically proficient melody-focused enthusiast. It immediately created this symbiotic dynamic.
They quickly added George Harrison, though. Lennon initially dismissed him as too young.
He did. Lennon was 3 years older, and at first he just saw 14-year-old George as a kid. But McCartney engineered the famous bus audition.
Where Harrison played raunchy.
And proved his guitar skills were just indispensable. This early period, it cemented Lennon as the group's de facto leader. The others, according to McCartney, absolutely idolized him. They called him our own little Elvis.
That early idolization is so crucial because it sets up the inevitable conflict that came later when he gradually started to cede that leadership role to McCartney.
Especially as the band needed more commercial structure. And that shift began early, tested brutally during their residencies in West Germany. Hamburg was a crucible.
It really was. Starting in 1960, they were doing these incredibly long overnight shifts, sometimes 8 hours straight.
And the sources confirm that punishing schedule led them to rely on preludin, a stimulant which they took regularly just to keep the energy up.
And that just speaks to the sheer physical toll required long before they were global sensations. Once Beatlemania hit globally in '63, the demands just escalated dramatically.
And that led to the strict managerial control of Brian Epstein. He needed to sanitize them for mass consumption.
Which meant the clandestine marriage to Cynthia, the secret birth of Julian.
All of it. Epstein was terrified that a married Beatle would instantly alienate the millions of young female fans who were driving Beatlemania. So Lennon, the anti-establishment figure, had to accept this conformity for the sake of stratospheric success.
He had that great line about it.
Right, he quipped he'd wear a bloody balloon if it made them money.
But the internal costs of that conformity, it started to surface really quickly by 1965.
He hit a massive personal wall. He famously called it his Fat Elvis period. He was struggling with his weight, feeling increasingly alienated, paranoid from the constant screaming. He was trapped.
And the song Help was not just some clever pop tune.
No, it was a genuine, desperate cry for emotional assistance from a man who felt the pressure of fame was just suffocating him.
The sources indicate he was really concerned that the constant touring meant their actual musicianship was suffering. The music was just unheard over the din.
Completely, and this leads directly to the massive artistic shift that began in 1966, fueled by an accidental and then continuous use of drugs.
The incident in March '66 is just astounding.
It is. Lennon and Harrison were unknowingly introduced to LSD when a dentist spiked their coffee at a dinner party.
Can you imagine?
That terrifying involuntary introduction opened a door he never fully closed. His subsequent continuous use of LSD, particularly in '67, was so intense that one author notes it brought him close to erasing his identity completely.
But chemically altering his consciousness also profoundly altered his creative output and his view of the art form itself.
Exactly. Before this, he saw the lyrics of early pop songs as almost irrelevant. Post-LSD, he began insisting on complex, innovative lyricism that reflected his altered perception of reality.
And this shift is perfectly encapsulated by the song he later said was his finest work with the band, Strawberry Fields Forever.
That single is an absolute technical marvel, especially for 1967. The studio work on it was a revolution.
How so?
Well, it required this unprecedented amount of editing. Lennon recorded two completely different versions with different keys, different tempos, and producer George Martin had to manually slow down and speed up the tapes to splice them together.
Into a single track.
Right. And then the use of the mellotron, that keyboard that played taped orchestral sounds, it added to this surreal, dreamlike atmosphere. It showed that the studio was now an instrument for Lennon, a way to express his complex internal state. They were moving far beyond the simple four-piece band sound.
This personal and creative explosion was immediately overshadowed by a public relations disaster that changed the band's trajectory forever.
The more popular than Jesus controversy.
The quote itself, made to an Evening Standard reporter in March '66, "We're more popular than Jesus now." It was, a statement of fact about cultural prominence in England.
Where it was barely even noticed.
But when it was republished in the U.S. 5 months later, the cultural context was completely different. The reaction was volcanic.
Absolutely. There was KKK activity, religious groups led public protests, they were burning Beatles records.
And there were explicit threats targeting Lennon.
He had to issue this quasi-apology in Chicago just to quell the uproar. He claimed he was just commenting on the decline of religion, not criticizing Christ. But the ultimate consequence was concrete and permanent. This furor provided the final, undeniable reason for the band to stop touring.
So was the controversy really the only reason, or was it just the perfect, highly publicized exit ramp they desperately needed?
I think it was certainly the convenient catalyst. The sources suggest the band was already deeply unhappy and creatively constrained by the touring schedule. The Jesus controversy just provided an ethical and physical justification.
We can't ensure our safety, so we have to stop.
Exactly. Something the management and the band could all agree on. Their final concert was August 29th, 1966, and they never looked back.
With touring finished, they channeled all that energy into the studio, led to State Pepper, the height of their collaboration. But soon after, in 1967, one of the crucial pillars of the Beatles crumbled.
Brian Epstein's death. That was the turning point towards collapse.
Lennon's immediate reaction was incredibly revealing.
He said, "I knew we were in trouble then. We fucking had it now." Epstein, whatever his flaws, he had managed their external life. He held the personalities together. His absence left this massive structural and emotional void.
Paul McCartney tried to fill that void by organizing the Magical Mystery Tour project.
But the dynamic was already changing, especially with the increasingly permanent presence of Yoko Ono.
Ono's presence in the studio was the visible embodiment of that fracture.
It was. Lennon met her in November '66, and by late '68, he insisted on her presence during recording sessions. This violated a long-standing band policy that prohibited wives and girlfriends from being in the studio.
And that added immense friction during the sessions for the White Album.
It signaled that for Lennon, his relationship with Ono had superseded his professional commitment to the band, and that created deep resentment among the others.
It's ironic, though, that the album recorded during this period of intense conflict, the White Album, was one that Lennon later particularly valued for his own songwriting.
He was fiercely proud of it because it was chaotic, raw, and felt closer to his own creative ideals, which were moving towards starker, more experimental material. The tension of Ono's presence might have been personally destructive, but creatively, it was a liberating force for him.
The end finally came in 1969. Lennon told the others he was leaving on September 20th, but agreed to keep it quiet.
Right, while they finalized contract renegotiations. And this is where that famous rivalry with McCartney flared up one final bitter time.
When McCartney released his solo debut in April 1970 and used the press release to publicize his own departure,
Lennon was utterly outraged. He felt Paul had deliberately stolen the narrative and gets all the credit for it.
it must have felt like a final act of betrayal.
It was. Lennon later summarized his feelings with this definitive finality. I started the band. I disbanded it. It's as simple as that. He admitted he was a fool not to have used his own departure for commercial gain, but the bitterness was obvious. The end of the 60s left him standing on a creative and emotional cliff edge.
Free from the Beatles, but deeply scarred and searching for a way to process a lifetime of trauma. And that sets the stage for his radical solo work. That description of Lennon on an emotional cliff edge is it's crucial, because once he was free of the Beatles, he didn't run towards commercial pop. He dove headfirst into radical, personal, psychological repair.
Which led to his most brutal and honest music. The transition from the Beatles' grand orchestral pop to the stark, minimalist sound of his solo debut is directly tied to his decision to undergo primal therapy.
Starting in 1970.
With Dr. Arthur Janoff's radical technique, it was designed to help patients release the deep, often repressed emotional pain rooted in childhood trauma.
Can you elaborate on what primal therapy actually entailed? It sounds intense.
Incredibly intense. The core idea is that neuroses are caused by repressed emotional pain, the primal pain. So the therapy aimed to have you re-experience these traumatic childhood moments, especially the feeling of abandonment, in a controlled environment.
Often resulting in loud, involuntary screams.
The primal scream, exactly. Lennon and Ono spent 6 months undergoing this in London and Los Angeles.
And the musical result of literally screaming out his childhood pain was the 1970 album John Lennon Plastic Ono Band.
It is pure, unfiltered primal scream on vinyl. Musically sparse, almost aggressively simple, so nothing distracts from the raw emotion.
Tracks like Mother.
A direct confrontation of that childhood rejection. He's repeating the desperate line, "Mother, you had me, but I never had you." It's an auditory exorcism of that 1946 abandonment.
And then you have Working Class Hero, which isn't just confessional, it's a searing socio-political critique.
That track established his new, radical voice. An attack on social systems designed to numb the public and keep them in their place, and the song's inclusion of strong language
Fucking crazy fucking peasants.
resulted in it being immediately banned by broadcasters in the UK and US. And that just cemented his post-Beatles identity as a genuinely radical anti-establishment voice. He was willing to sacrifice radio play for authenticity.
Yet, almost immediately after this critically acclaimed but commercially difficult Raw album, he reversed his course for Imagine in 1971.
Well, he needed commercial success. He was clear about that. He adopted a much more accessible sound for Imagine, making the radical political messages more palatable for a wider audience.
And he succeeded commercially, although critics like Rolling Stone initially worried that his posturings will soon seem not merely dull but irrelevant.
A critique that proved spectacularly wrong, largely because of the title track.
Imagine, the undisputed anthem of peace. But a controversial one, just like his earlier comments on religion.
Oh yeah. The sheer reach of Imagine as an anti-war anthem is impossible to overstate. However, its radical plea for a world with no religion offended a lot of fundamentalist groups.
But he clarified that, didn't he?
He did. He was quick to say he wasn't attacking spirituality, but the divisive dogmatic structures that lead to conflict, that my God is bigger than your God mentality.
And his early activism was incredibly effective at mobilizing opinion. I mean, you look at Give Peace a Chance.
That track, famously recorded during the Montreal bed-in, was instantaneously adopted as the anti-Vietnam protest song. Within months, 250,000 demonstrators were singing it at a massive protest in Washington, D.C.
It showed their power to provide a simple, powerful slogan that could unite a movement.
Their activism was relentless and highly publicized. They used their honeymoon for the 2-week anti-war demonstration, the bed-in, first Amsterdam, then Montreal. They also introduced Beigism,
Ageism was a brilliant piece of conceptual performance art.
First unveiled at a Vienna press conference, it involved them wearing giant bags over their entire bodies, symbolizing equality and anonymity.
The message being, you should judge people by their ideas, not their appearance.
Exactly. Using absurdity to make a serious point about prejudice.
Lennon was also willing to make these grand, symbolic political statements against the British government itself.
He returned his MBE in 1969, his Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire medal.
And the stated reasons were threefold.
Right. In protest at Britain's role in the Nigerian Civil War, the Nigeria-Biafra thing, as he called it, their support for the U.S. in Vietnam. And in a typical flash of cynicism, he joked he was also protesting his single cold turkey slipping down the charts.
A move that officially severed his connection to the establishment. But when he moved to New York City in 1971, the stakes immediately became much, much higher.
Absolutely. Moving to New York allowed him and Ono to immediately embrace the U.S. radical left. They befriended highly visible anti-war activists like Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman. And Lennon's criticism of the Vietnam War and, crucially, of President Nixon, it became louder and more effective.
Reaching millions of young people.
And this political effectiveness put a huge target on his back, which led the Nixon administration to take a strategic countermeasure.
A phrase straight out of a spy novel.
It was political persecution, plain and simple. The Nixon administration, nervous about Lennon's ability to mobilize young voters against the war, initiated this relentless 4-year attempt to deport him.
And their legal justification was a 1968 cannabis conviction he had in London.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't interested in immigration enforcement. They were interested in silencing a highly effective political dissident. They tried to cloak it in bureaucratic language, but internal memos, especially one from Senator Strom Thurmond, confirmed the political intent. He suggested deportation would be a necessary strategic countermeasure.
This intense political battle consumed years of his life.
And significant financial resources. But this high-stakes legal fight went all the way to the courts, thankfully.
It did. The deportation attempt was finally barred in 1975. A court of appeals issued this landmark ruling.
They explicitly stated that the courts will not condone selective deportation based upon secret political grounds. It confirmed beyond a doubt that the whole campaign had been politically motivated from the start.
And the scale of the government's interest was later revealed.
Yes. Posthumous legal efforts fought for 14 years to release the FBI files on Lennon. What was revealed confirmed the paranoia. The FBI had amassed 281 pages of files on him.
Documenting his political activities, surveillance. They saw him as a genuine threat.
They did. And how did Lennon and Ono respond while they were fighting it?
In the most absurd and artistic way possible.
In response to the initial deportation order in '73, they announced the formation of the conceptual state of Newtopia.
Not a real country.
But a place with no land, no boundaries, no passports, only people.
And they treated the announcement as a genuine diplomatic event.
Absolutely. At the press conference, they waved the white flag of Newtopia, which was 2 white handkerchiefs, and declared themselves ambassadors. The national anthem of Utopia on his Mind Games album was 3 seconds of silence. A brilliant, absurdist way of using performance art to protest real political oppression.
We've talked about Lennon the artist and activist, but we have to turn to Lennon the man in relationships.
Right.
Which were defined by, well, extreme turbulence, a constant desire for stability.
And, initially, a profound chauvinistic attitude that caused deep pain.
His personal life reads like a series of dramatic attempts to find the stability he lacked in childhood, often marred by his own deep-seated insecurities and anger issues.
Look at his first marriage to Cynthia Lennon in 1962. It had to be clandestine, hidden by Brian Epstein to protect that Beatlemania image.
And that secrecy extended even to the birth of their son, Julian, in 1963.
Yes, which set a terrible precedent. This environment of secrecy, combined with Lennon's volatility, made the marriage incredibly difficult. Cynthia recounted a particularly disturbing incident early on.
Where she struck her.
After seeing her dancing with his friend, Stuart Sutcliffe, she ended the relationship temporarily because of the assault.
It's a painful truth, the sources confirm. The man who sang "Give Peace a Chance" was capable of physical violence toward women.
It highlights the massive contradiction at the heart of his identity. However, Lennon later had this moment of intense public self-reflection about this behavior.
He confessed that until he met Ono, he never questioned his own deeply ingrained chauvinistic attitude.
He stated bluntly, he said, "I used to be cruel to my woman, and physically any woman. I was a hitter. That is why I am always on about peace."
That statement is so critical. He recognized that his advocacy for peace wasn't just external political posturing, but an internal reckoning with his own past violence.
It suggests that the primal rage that fueled his early behavior was something he spent years trying to process and reform. He even saw songs like the Beatles getting better as a reflection of his own struggle to improve himself.
The marriage ended violently and suddenly for Cynthia. Finding Lennon with Yoko Ono at their home left her shocked and humiliated.
And that abrupt transition led directly into one of the most famous and chaotic periods of his life, the Lost Weekend.
The 18-month separation from Ono from 73 to 75, and the detail about how that separation began is truly astounding.
It is perhaps the most bizarre arrangement in rock history. Ono, who had initiated the separation, suggested that her personal assistant, May Pang, should begin a physical relationship with Lennon.
She reportedly told Pang that Lennon likes you a lot.
Can you imagine? Pang was understandably astounded by this assignment, but she agreed, and they embarked on what Lennon later called his Lost Weekend.
And while it was chaotic, marked by heavy drinking and infamous public antics,
Like scuffling with a waitress at the Troubadour with Harry Nilsson.
the period was also surprisingly fruitful creatively.
It was a massive creative burst, almost like a period of temporary artistic freedom from the intensity of the Ono relationship. He produced Harry Nilsson's Pussycats album.
And he scored his first genuine solo #1 hit in the U.S.
Whatever Gets You Through the Night, a collaboration with Elton John. He also worked with David Bowie on Fame, Bowie's first U.S. #1, where Lennon used the pseudonym Dr. Winston O'Boogie.
The sources revealed that May Pang played a critical role in repairing a far more important relationship during this chaos, the one with his eldest son, Julian.
This is perhaps the most redeeming aspect of the entire Lost Weekend. Lennon had been really neglectful of Julian, especially after moving to the U.S. Pang actively encouraged Lennon to develop regular contact.
And this led to a significantly better, more involved relationship between them.
They started taking trips together, including to Disneyland. Julian even contributed musically, playing drums on a track for Lennon's Walls and Bridges album.
Julian later recalled that they got on a great deal better during this period.
For the first time, Lennon was consistently present for his son, a direct contrast to his own absent father.
The Lost Weekend ended in February 1975, and the reconciliation with Ono was conditioned upon a fundamental change in Lennon's lifestyle.
Yes. Ono, who had suffered 3 miscarriages, agreed to continue the pregnancy that resulted in Sean.
Born on Lennon's 35th birthday, October 9th, 1975.
Only if Lennon agreed to completely retire from the public eye and become a house husband.
And he embraced this domesticity completely. The famous 5-year hiatus.
It was a total commitment. He famously said he baked bread and looked after the baby. He was the primary caregiver up at 6 a.m. daily. The sources even note he took photos of Sean every single day of his first year.
He said, "He didn't come out of my belly, but by God, I made his bones."
This period was his sustained search for the stable home life he never had.
And his return to music in 1980 was prompted by, what was it?
A sailing trip to Bermuda. The journey, the solitude, it reinvigorated him creatively. And it led directly to the material for the Double Fantasy album.
Which was so focused on domestic bliss and partnership, a direct reflection of those 5 years of peace he'd finally achieved.
Right. And before we move on, we should just touch on his post-Beatles dynamics with the other members. That musical competitiveness with McCartney clearly continued well into the 70s.
Oh, they argued through the press, took jabs at each other in their songs.
They did. But they eventually reestablished a fragile friendship. They even spent time together, recorded a bootleg session in '74, and Lennon seemed to find some peace with it, concluding near the end of his life that he'd selected to work with only 2 people, Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono. That ain't bad picking.
But the relationship with George Harrison soured late in life.
It did.
Yeah.
In 1980, Harrison published his autobiography, I, Me, Mine. And Lennon was genuinely hurt by what he saw as a glaring omission of his own influence on Harrison's life.
It showed how easily those bonds could still be fractured by ego and perceived slights.
Even after all that time.
We've focused so heavily on Lennon the songwriter, but we have to recognize Lennon the artist, the man who went to art school and maintained a fascination with non-traditional art forms his whole life.
He was a visual artist and a writer first. His literary works, in his own right from '64 and A Spaniard in the Works from '65, are these fantastic collections of nonsense writing, poetry, line drawings, filled with that satirical wordplay and cynical humor that started back in his daily Howell School magazine.
The fact that he was dyslexic just makes the mastery of that sophisticated wordplay even more remarkable.
It's a phenomenal achievement. I mean, the Times Literary Supplement, an incredibly highbrow publication, took his nonsense writing completely seriously. They called the works remarkable and very funny.
And Lennon was genuinely surprised.
That his satirical anti-establishment humor was being analyzed as genuine literary output.
His art became genuinely provocative once he collaborated with Ono, who was immersed in the conceptual art movement known as Fluxus.
Right, and understanding Fluxus is key here. It was an international interdisciplinary movement focused on challenging the concept of what art fundamentally is. It emphasized process over product, anti-commercialism, absurdity.
So Ono's involvement meant Lennon was exposed to and actively participated in these profoundly non-traditional projects.
What are some of the most striking examples of this provocative work?
Well, there are collaborations like funding Ono's 1967 Half a Room exhibition where everything in the room was cut in half, but they also went far darker and more confrontational.
Like the 1969 film Self-Portrait.
A single, sustained 40-minute shot of Lennon's penis. I mean, it's impossible to be more provocative about celebrity and vulnerability.
And his Bag 1 lithographs led directly to a brush with the law.
Yes. The 1970 collection of lithographs depicted erotic imagery from their honeymoon. They were so controversial that the police raided the exhibition, confiscating 8 of the 14 pieces on the grounds of indecency. He clearly enjoyed pushing those societal boundaries. Shifting back to his music, let's explore the technical dimensions of his vocal style. Instantly recognizable, incredibly powerful.
His voice was his emotional weapon, deeply influenced by early rock and roll shouters like Little Richard. Critics described it as a brassy northern roar flecked with bluesy moans.
He could range from that extreme vulnerability you hear on Julia or Mother to a hard, abrasive, rasping style.
That rasping style is best demonstrated on the recording of Twist and Shout.
A legendary session.
It was the very last track recorded for their first album, Please Please Me. Lennon was battling a severe cold. Producer George Martin knew they only had one shot.
And Lennon performed it by nearly screaming.
He almost shredded his vocal cords right there in the studio. That raw, destructive energy became one of his vocal hallmarks.
But despite that raw power, the sources consistently note he had this major insecurity about his own voice.
A profound one. George Martin said Lennon had an inborn dislike of his own voice and was constantly asking him to make it different.
Which led Martin to employ various studio techniques, double tracking, reverb, echo.
Constantly modifying Lennon's sound to satisfy his discomfort.
As for his instruments, what were his main creative tools outside of his role as the Beatles' rhythm guitarist?
Well, while he played rhythm guitar as a Beatle, most famously the Rickenbacker 325 and the Epiphone Casino, the piano was his essential creative anchor. He composed so many of his famous songs on it, including Imagine.
There's also that wonderful personal detail that producer Jack Douglas claimed about his guitar playing.
That he habitually tuned his D strings slightly flat.
Why would he do that?
Douglas claimed he did it so that his Aunt Mimi, who was skeptical of his career but listened devoutly, could tell which guitar was his on the recordings.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about his need to connect his adult success back to his difficult childhood home.
It really does.
Finally, we have to acknowledge the tragic end of this complex life. The events of December 8th, 1980, outside the Dakota, it's a moment seared into collective memory.
An unbelievable tragedy. At 5 p.m. that day, he autographed a copy of Double Fantasy for Mark David Chapman. When Lennon returned home around 10:50 p.m., Chapman was waiting.
And he shot him 4 times, twice in the back, twice in the shoulder.
Lennon was pronounced dead shortly after, at 11:15 p.m.
The immediate aftermath saw a massive outpouring of grief, but also a final, profound, posthumous commercial success for his last work.
The tragedy spurred immense sales and recognition. Double Fantasy won the 1981 Grammy for Album of the Year. His singles dominated the charts globally in the following weeks. Just like starting over, Imagine, Woman.
His musical legacy was instantly and permanently cemented, and his honors reflect that enduring global impact across culture, art, even astronomy.
Ranked the 5th greatest singer, 38th greatest artist of all time by Rolling Stone. Imagine voted the UK's favorite song lyric in a 1999 BBC poll. His name graces the Liverpool John Lennon Airport, ensuring that connection to his roots is permanent.
And yes, there's even a crater on Mercury named after him.
As one historian summarized, his legacy endures because of his profound willingness to take risks with his career and his life. So this deep dive, it really reveals a life defined by extremes, by contradictions.
The early abandonment created the rebellious nonconformist,
Who then masterfully leveraged his enormous commercial success not for quiet retirement, but to pursue highly confrontational avant-garde art and become this high-stakes, effective political figure.
And the final years, that search for lasting domestic peace, the life of baking bread and raising Sean, was tragically cut short just as he was re-emerging with Double Fantasy.
We've navigated the layers. The angry young man who confessed to his former chauvinism and matured into a self-aware advocate for peace.
The academic failure who became a genuinely praised literary genius. The global music icon who constantly fought the system enduring a 4-year political siege from the Nixon White House.
He was never afraid to be loud, to be controversial, or to be painfully honest.
And that commitment to activism never faded. The source material shows that his final act of political solidarity, a statement supporting striking minority sanitation workers in San Francisco, was delivered just days before his death.
He was planning to join their protest shortly after he was killed.
So what does this all mean? We know Lennon's political voice was effective, loud, constantly challenging established power, leading directly to FBI files and deportation attempts. He was prepared to sacrifice his comfortable life for his radical beliefs.
Right. So, given his history of anti-establishment and anti-imperialist criticism, and his final planned act of solidarity with working-class strikers, what would Lennon's voice have sounded like in the conservative political landscape of the 1980s and beyond?
If he had successfully maintained that domestic stability he sought,
could the man who advocated for a world with no possessions have remained politically effective when the world moved towards globalized capitalism?
it's a compelling question, and one for you to consider and explore.